So unless you live under a rock, you can't help but be bombarded with all these ads for sports betting. And sports betting is easier than ever now. You can place a bet within seconds. You don't have to go to a casino, to a bar. You don't have to talk to a shady bookie. It's just right there on your phone, on your computer. But the question we want to talk about today is this harmless entertainment, or are we sleepwalking into a new form of financial and moral exploitation? And there are really two sides to this argument. Some would see sports betting as mostly a matter of personal freedom and entertainment, and others would see sports betting as something more sinister, a predatory industry that's exploiting addiction and bad math. We had the Super Bowl not that long ago, March Madness, the Masters golf tournament. We're heading into basketball playoffs, hockey playoffs. We've just been seeing sports advertisements everywhere. And today we want to talk about this issue and see where we come down on it after hearing from both sides. I want to start here with just the Christian perspective on gambling. Certainly, when we look at the Bible, there is no direct mention of sports betting, but there are many principles and references, at least we can see in the Bible, to gambling, or at least what we could categorize as gambling. In the Bible, we read about people casting lots. That phrase is used many times in the Bible, but it's not exactly the same as gambling, or at least probably the way that we think of gambling in modern terms. You think about the story of Jonah and the sailors casting lots, the Roman soldiers at the cross casting lots for Jesus' garment. We even see with the selection of the 12th apostle, after Judas was out of the picture, how did they choose the 12th apostle? They cast lots. Now, we don't know exactly what form that took. That could have been sticks. That could have been rolling some type of dice. Probably the best way, the best modern analogy we would have to casting lots would be like flipping a coin or doing rock, paper, scissors. Basically, casting lots was a way to ensure that the outcome of something was random, was by chance, or at least up to divine intervention, however we wanted to look at it, but it was out of the hands of the people involved. You were leaving it up to something else. But there are many principles in the Bible. Even though you're not going to find a verse that says thou shalt not bet on sports, certainly you're going to see many verses that could be applied. The principles can be applied to the area of betting. You can look at Proverbs 13:11. Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. People who come into money in a windfall fashion tend not to always manage it very well, but people who build wealth slowly do. 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 10, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. You look at just all the terrible things that are perpetrated in this world. Very often there is some kind of financial incentive at the root. Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 10, written by Solomon, one of the wealthiest men who ever lived. He said, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. So certainly we understand as Christians should never set our attention or our affection on money. That always leads to bad results. But historically, Christians have always viewed gambling in a fairly negative, from a fairly negative viewpoint. And we see this for many different reasons. Christians historically over the centuries have viewed gambling as morally or spiritually harmful, and that is for a variety of reasons. Greed and covetousness, as those verses made reference to, a desire for unearned wealth, but also because of its exploitation of the poor. Church leaders throughout history have pointed out that gambling often preys on the most financially vulnerable. That leads to a lot of financial ruin and broken families. Also, gambling can undermine hard work and stewardship. The Protestant work ethic really emphasized labor, discipline, wise stewardship as what God expects of us. Gambling, by contrast, tends to promote this idea of chance over hard work and over consistency. But then also ideas about addiction and idolatry and setting our affection or attention on money above God. And it can lead to a lack of trust in God and His provision. And we can look at many notable church leaders and Christian leaders in the past. You go all the way back to Augustine in the 4th century. He warned against games of chance. You look at Martin Luther and John Calvin in the Protestant Reformation. They both condemned gambling as sinful, and they associated it with things like theft and other vices. You look at like the Methodist and Baptist traditions, that they strongly opposed gambling. They even were very much involved in campaigning for legal restrictions against gambling. But I think you could say, and in good faith say, that's all well and good, but really the landscape of gambling has really changed very recently, so that maybe it's time for us to take a fresh look at what our response as Christians should be to gambling. You don't have to go to a casino anymore. Yes, gambling used to always be associated with other vices, but that's now no longer necessarily the case. You can do that in the privacy of your own home. You have a private login right at your fingertips on your phone, on your computer. So should we be thinking differently? And I would encourage all of us and any of these issues that are not clearly talked about in the scripture to approach it with an idea of, hey, let's think thoughtfully about these issues, let's understand the nuance, and let's try to apply biblical principles to all aspects of our life, including this issue of sports betting. Now, the rise of sports betting, let's talk about that for a second, because in the last 10 to 20 years, the landscape of sports betting has changed tremendously. There was a day where sports leagues and courts tried to keep gambling at arm's length. They wanted nothing to do with it. But that has changed very quickly because the money is just so overwhelming that these entities cannot resist the billions and billions of dollars that sports betting brings to the table. Sports betting is a $100 billion industry. The Super Bowl alone saw $16 billion in bets. And in states where sports betting is legal, and it seems like every year we're adding more states to that list, advertising is everywhere. You see it on sports talk shows, you see it on podcasts, social media, even in in-game commentary. We've got ESPN and Fox News. They have whole shows dedicated to betting odds and understanding the betting odds. It used to be that sports gambling was a very niche, underground activity. Very few people were involved in it, partly because it was just difficult to do. You had to literally find somebody, you had to go somewhere in order to place a bet, but also because of its more negative connotations. But now we have celebrities, we have influencers, we have athletes that are out there telling you you should bet and encouraging you to bet. So it seemed to be normalized in our culture, and a lot of that negative baggage seems to be gone, and that's happened very, very quickly. By the way, it's interesting because NFL, NBA, PGA, all these leagues, not that long ago, looked down their noses at sports betting like, well, we would never. That would harm the integrity of our game, until all of a sudden they realized, well, the legal landscape has changed and we can make billions of dollars. So yeah, FanDuel and DraftKings and all these guys, they're our best friends. So it's funny how quickly that changed. Let's make the case for sports betting as harmless fun, as something that any adult should be allowed to do and that we shouldn't judge or put limitations on, or at least not limiting. Not too strong of limitations, I should say. Well, first of all, and I'll try to make the steel man case here, we have this idea of a freedom of choice, right? As Americans, we believe that adults really have the right to live their life the way that they want, that they see fit, and that includes how they spend their money. And if Americans want to bet on sports as part of their financial choices, they should have the ability and opportunity to do so. We shouldn't restrict that. And the cultural shift is already here. I think you could also say that the ship has left the dock. Like there may have been a time where we could have kind of nipped it in the bud and said, no, we don't want to go that direction, but cat's out of the bag. It's already here. What are you going to do? So we might as well live with the reality of the current situation. It's embedded in sports culture. It's in ads. It's on broadcasts. It's in fantasy leagues. And by the way, when we're talking about sports betting, I'm really talking here about betting on outcomes of games, betting on outcomes of individual athletes' performances. I'm not talking about, I did a March Madness pool and we all threw in $20, or I have a fantasy football league and we all throw in some money. I mean, yes, I know technically that's sports betting, but I'm talking more in general of people who do sports betting through the FanDuel, DraftKings, more in that traditional sense, doing those types of betting. So I just want to be clear on the distinctions I'm trying to make here. If we legalize it, then that recognizes just the reality of people are betting and they're going to bet no matter what. And this is a way to manage it responsibly. Like people are going to drink. You go back to Prohibition days. In fact, actually, I think that's one of the strongest arguments to be made in favor of sports betting. And that is when you take something that you feel is an ill to society and try to make it illegal and ban it, when it's something that's large enough that a significant portion of your population is going to do anyway, all you're really doing is encouraging people to do it in an illegal way, and it leads to a rise in organized crime. It leads to more violence. It leads to more corruption and extortion. It leads to fewer safeguards on public health. And so if we legalize sports betting, it allows us to manage it in a more responsible way, make sure that people don't abuse the system. And then there can be economic benefits for that. If we legalize sports betting, then we can tax it. Then we can use that state tax revenue to fund public services, things that are in the general public good. We do that already with the lottery system. Money that's brought in from the lottery, we use it to fund public services. Also, the sports leagues and the businesses built around the sports industry, they also bet from the engagement. Because think about it, when people are betting on games, they watch the games more often. They're more likely to go to the games. They're more likely to be invested in the players and the merchandise. And so everybody that's involved in the sports industry benefits. Teams have more viewers, they have more attendees, they get more ad revenue, they sell more merchandise. And everybody that's tangentially involved in the sports industry is benefiting from that. So it's a net benefit for all of us because there's more money in that economy. And also, gambling is not new. Let's not pretend that this just materialized out of thin air 10 years ago. People have been betting on horse racing, on boxing, they've been playing cards, poker, they've been doing lotteries. These things have been around for centuries. I mean, you go back, we just talked about in the Bible, we see that people do cast lots, they bet. Like, betting has been a part of the human experience for as long as we've had history and written history. Like, it's just part of the human condition. So gambling's not new. It's not going anywhere. So we might as well put some limitations around it and allow it to be legalized in a way where we can control it. And so that can require more transparency, more fairness, safeguards. So for instance, we can verify age and identity. So we make sure that underage people are not gambling. We can use self-inclusion tools. If people are abusing the system, we can make sure that they get cut off from that. If people are going to use these gambling sites, we can put those warnings, like you always see with the gambling commercials or ads. There's always, call this 1-800 number if you're addicted to gambling. But then it just makes people more aware of the help and the tools at their disposal. So that's the Steelman case. Well, what's the case against sports betting? Well, a lot to be said here. First of all, the psychology of addiction tells us a lot of things. These apps that are on our phone, just like social media, has figured out how to monopolize our attention, to use push notifications, to use algorithms, to use targeted ads. They know how to keep us hooked. I'm talking about social media here. And sports betting apps know how to keep you hooked. And whatever addiction could have manifested itself when a trip to Vegas, you just multiply that times 10 and multiply it times 100. It's in your pocket. It's in your hand. You're looking at it multiple times a day. And man, you took somebody who has a proclivity to be addicted to betting and then gave it to them right on their device. That is a recipe for some problems right there. Sports betting uses bad math to win big. And this, I cannot stress this enough. Most bettors lose over time because of the house edge. We understand. I'm not breaking any news here. But of course, the FanDuel and DraftKings and MGM and ESPN Bet and whatever sports book you want to talk about, they're going to build in an edge for themselves. It's like the roulette wheel. You know how that is, where they have all the different numbers and there's red and there's black. There's always one space, sometimes two spaces. There's zero, maybe sometimes double zero. Why are those spaces there? Because if you put your money on black and it lands on black, you double your money. If you put it on red, it gets red, you double your money. You're like, well, it's always a 50-50 proposition. How does the casino make any money? Because if the ball lands on zero or on double zero, nobody gets any money. And even though those spaces are a small percentage of the total wheel, even if it's a 1% chance that it lands on those spaces, that's enough of an edge that over time the casino is going to make money on those bets. The house does not want balanced bets. They want uneducated bettors to overestimate their chances. There's lots of statistics we can cite. These were some of the most interesting ones that I found. Over 60% of sports bets are placed on parlays, which have terrible odds. What's a parlay? Well, a regular bet would be, hey, the Nuggets are playing the Los Angeles Clippers. I think the Nuggets are going to win. I place money on them. If they win, I make money. If they lose, I lose that bet. That's just a straight up bet. But a parlay would say, I'm going to bet on 3 or 4 games, on the outcome of 3 or 4 games, and I have to hit all of them correctly. But if I do, I get a much bigger payout. So maybe if I place $100 on this game and I get it right, I will only win $60 because that team was favored anyway. But if I bet on 3 teams that are playing tonight and I get all of them, maybe I win $200. So wow, I makes that much more money. The problem is the sports books have put it in such a way that really the real payout, the mathematical payout should be like $300 for winning, but they use bad math to their advantage because it's hard for you to calculate in your mind what the real payout should be for that. All you see is, well, if this team wins, I win $60. If all 3 teams win, I win $200. I'm just going to go for the bigger payout. And that's where sportsbooks make most of their money, off of people that don't understand math. or don't have the ability to do advanced math off the top of their head. Get this, 90% of revenue comes from just 10% of gamblers. In other words, most people on sportsbook sites don't make a lot of bets, and when they do, they're not huge bets, and they don't add a lot of profit to the bottom line for those businesses. But just like a lot of businesses, most of the money comes from their super fans, or they call their VIP players. And VIP is a very, very loose term because these are the people who are the addicts. These are the people who make 10, 12 bets a day, who are constantly on their app, who are constantly getting payday loans and transferring money from their bank account just to start this cycle all over again. And every now and then they hit some big bets and they get up and they make a few $1,000s, but they can't quit while they're ahead. They eventually continue to gamble that money and lose it over the long run. So because sportsbooks make most of their profits from those heavy bettors, they have an incentive to keep those players in the loop and not kick them off of their apps. In fact, actually, they do the exact opposite. If you're a really good bettor, if you are somebody who understands advanced statistics and really does your homework and actually does find opportunities where the odds are off, they will kick you off after a certain number of successful bets. And the way that they can tell if you're a really good bettor is if when you make bets, where do the odds move after you've made your bet? And if usually they move in your favor, that means you know something, something's up, and they won't let you stay on the app. They will literally kick you off the app. The people that they allow on the app are the people that they know are likely to lose money over the long run. Here's another sad statistic. Gambling Addiction Hotline saw a 45% increase in calls after sports betting was legalized. It makes sense, right? Once you legalize it, a lot more people are going to gamble. A lot more people are going to end up in trouble. Nearly half of 18 to 24-year-old men have placed a sports bet online in the last year. And it's particularly young men who are most at risk for this. Young men tend to be risk takers. Young men tend to be sports watchers. And young men tend to not be very fiscally responsible. It is a recipe for a disaster. When you're talking about the people that this is hurting, men 18 to 24, probably all the way up to 30, these are the prime targets for men who get themselves in trouble financially with sports betting. DraftKings and FanDuel spend over $300 million a year on marketing, but when the sports betting industry makes over $100 billion, that's just a drop in the bucket. You can place a bet on mobile betting in under 10 seconds. So you can make a massive financial commitment, a massive financial mistake with just a few taps. No friction, no difficulty, no reality check, no little button that says, "Are you really sure you want to bet this money?" They just let you do it because they want to remove the friction. They want to remove the difficulty. And what's happening is there's a whole generation of young people who are getting normalized. Gambling is being normalized to them. That's just what people do. Younger users are more susceptible to problem gambling. There's a flood of ads, of influencer sponsorships, sports media coverage that just reinforces this is just a normal part of being a fan. Man, there's so many other things I want to say here, but I'm going to leave it at that for today. Sports gambling, harmless entertainment, or predatory business model. Where should we stand as Christians? Is this just a form of personal entertainment and we should leave it up to individuals' choices? Or is this an industry built on exploitation that we as Christians need to stand up and say something about? And I would encourage all of us to think critically about this. Are the odds really in your favor when it comes to sports betting? Is this wise use and wise management of your money? Are sports leagues and media companies really looking out for their fans, or are they just profiting from their losses? And seriously, I would be remiss if I did not say this. If you are struggling with betting, if you found yourself in a bad spot financially because of some of these sports betting apps, don't wait to reach out for help. Let this be a wake-up call. Talk to somebody. If you reach out to me, I'm happily will get you connected with the right people, resources to help you overcome this. So what do you think? Do you fall more on the side of sports betting being harmless fun or predatory industry? You can always let me know, and I will see you all on our next episode.